The vast expanse of space was deceptively calm, the stars twinkling faintly against an endless void. But for Captain Adrian Holt, standing on the bridge of the Titan's shield, the calm was an illusion. It was the quiet before the storm, a storm humanity might not survive. The Zorthan Dominion's fleet had entered Earth's sector hours ago, their sleek warships prowling the outer reaches like predators toying with prey. Adrian's gaze was fixed on the tactical display projected before him, its soft blue glow casting sharp shadows across his angular features. The display outlined the Zorthan fleet's position, their formations like the jaws of a trap slowly closing around Earth's colonies. It was a message as clear as the ultimatum they'd sent: surrender or be annihilated. "Status on their movements?" Adrian asked, his tone calm but commanding. Commander Elise Tran, his second in command, straightened from her station, her sharp eyes scanning the incoming data. "Their reconnaissance ships have begun systematic scans of our outposts. They're expecting no resistance beyond planetary defenses. Typical arrogance." Adrian smirked faintly but didn't take his eyes off the display. "Let them scan. The longer they underestimate us, the better." The Titan's shield was quiet, the usual hum of activity subdued as the crew braced for what was to come. The bridge was a study in contrasts, its design massive and imposing, yet the officers manning it betrayed their unease with every clipped word and darting glance. Humanity had never faced a fleet like this, let alone with the untested might of the Colossus fleet. Adrian's thoughts were interrupted by a transmission request. The voice of the communications officer rang out. "Sir, we're receiving another signal from the Zorthan flagship. They're demanding a response." Adrian turned, his expression hardening. "Put it through." A hologram flickered to life in the center of the bridge, revealing the towering form of High Commander Vethric, a Zorthan leader with scales that shimmered dark blue under the projection's light. His elongated features twisted in disdain as his piercing yellow eyes scanned the room. "Humans," Vethric began, his voice a low, guttural hiss. "Your defiance is as futile as it is laughable. The Dominion offers you a choice: surrender your territories and pledge loyalty, or be eradicated. We have no desire to waste resources on your insignificant species." Adrian stepped forward, his hands clasped behind his back. "High Commander Vethric," he said, his voice steady, "your arrogance blinds you. Humanity is not as insignificant as you believe." Vethric's lipless mouth curled into something resembling a sneer. "Your bravado is amusing, Captain, but let me make this simple. Your planetary defenses are primitive, your technology laughable, and your fleet—" He paused, his sneer deepening. "If you can call it that, is non-existent." Adrian let the silence stretch, his crew exchanging uneasy glances as they awaited his response. Then he leaned slightly forward. "If that's what you believe, High Commander, I suggest you scan the shadow of Jupiter." For the first time, Vethric's confidence faltered. He turned to someone off-screen, barking orders in the Zorthan tongue. A moment later, his eyes widened slightly, just enough for Adrian to know the scan had revealed what was hidden. The Colossus fleet began to emerge from behind Jupiter's shadow, their massive forms moving with deliberate grace. The Titan's shield led the procession, its titanic hull a marvel of engineering and defiance. Nearly 4 kilometers long and bristling with weaponry, it dwarfed anything the Zorthans had seen. Flanking it were other colossal ships, each as imposing, their hulls dark and gleaming like blackened steel. Vethric's hologram flickered as he reeled from the sight. What is this?" he demanded, his confidence cracking. Adrian's smirk returned, subtle but sharp. "This, High Commander, is humanity's fleet, built not for surrender but for survival. We call it the Colossus fleet, and I suggest you remember the name." The hologram blinked out abruptly as Vethric cut the transmission. Elise let out a low whistle. "Well, that certainly got their attention." Adrian turned to his crew, his tone sharpening. "They'll recover from their shock quickly. Status on the fleet?" Elise checked her station. "All ships report green across the board. Final checks on weapons systems are underway. The smaller escorts are maintaining position to support our flanks. Adrian nodded. Good. Keep our formation tight, but don't show all our cards yet. Let the Zorthans make the first move. From the observation deck, the crew watched as the massive Zorthan fleet began to reposition. Their sleek silver ships were like a swarm of hornets compared to the towering human vessels. What they lacked in size, they made up for in speed and agility. Already the tactical display was lighting up with new data as the Zorthans moved into an offensive stance. "Here they come," Elise said, her tone tense. Adrian's voice cut through the tension. "Hold position. Make them come to us." Minutes felt like hours as the Zorthan fleet advanced, their smaller ships darting ahead like scouts. The silence on the bridge was broken only by the soft hum of systems and the occasional report from a console. Then, the tactical display flared to life. "They're launching fighters," Elise announced. "Hundreds of them." Adrian's jaw tightened. "Activate point defenses. Let's see how their fighters handle our firepower." The Titan's shield came alive as rows of turrets swiveled into position, locking on to the incoming swarm. The first wave of fighters entered range, their sleek forms zigzagging to avoid fire. But the Colossus fleet's point defense systems had been designed for this. Streams of tracer rounds and energy beams lit up the void, tearing through the enemy formations. Explosions flared like brief stars as dozens of Zorthan fighters were destroyed. Yet more pressed forward, their speed and numbers allowing them to evade much of the fire. Some began targeting the Titan's shield directly, unleashing volleys of plasma bolts that splashed harmlessly against its reinforced shields. "Shields holding at 98%, reported the tactical officer. "Good," Adrian said. "Let them tire themselves out." As the Zorthan fighters swarmed, the larger ships of their fleet held back, their commanders clearly observing the Colossus fleet's capabilities. It was a calculated move, and Adrian knew it. "They're testing us," Elise said, voicing what everyone was thinking. "Let them," Adrian replied. "The more they underestimate us, the better our chances." The bridge settled into a tense rhythm, the crew working with precision as the Titan's shield weathered the storm. Adrian watched the tactical display, his mind racing with strategies. This was only the beginning, and he knew the real battle had yet to start. "Signal the fleet," he ordered. "Prepare for full engagement. Let's show them what these ships can do." As the Colossus fleet began to maneuver into position, the Zorthans were forced to confront a terrifying reality. The small, inconsequential species they had dismissed was about to strike back, and their oversized ships weren't just for show. Adrian stood tall on the bridge, his gaze steady. The Zorthans had brought the fight to humanity, but they had no idea what they were up against. Not yet. The Zorthan fleet's movement was almost hypnotic, a dance of precision and efficiency that spoke to centuries of galactic domination. Their smaller ships darted forward in perfect formations, testing the human defenses with calculated strikes. On the bridge of the Titan's shield, Captain Adrian Holt stood motionless, his eyes fixed on the tactical display, as waves of Zorthan fighters surged like a living organism. "Enemy squadrons are closing in on the forward perimeter," reported Lieutenant Rami Oren from the sensor station. "They are coordinating their attacks, targeting specific sections of our fleet's defensive grid." Adrian folded his arms, his expression unreadable. "How are our defenses holding?" "Point defense systems are engaging," Commander Elise Tran said. "But their fighters are fast. Some are slipping through and testing shield integrity." The bridge lights flickered briefly as the ship absorbed a concentrated volley of plasma fire. The impact was nothing the Titan's shield couldn't handle, but it served as a stark reminder of the enemy's ferocity. "They're probing us," Elise continued, her voice clipped. "Looking for weaknesses." "Let them probe," Adrian said, his tone calm but firm. "They'll find nothing they can exploit." A series of explosions lit up the display as another wave of Zorthan fighters was obliterated by the Colossus fleet's defensive fire. The smaller human escorts darted between the massive capital ships, their own weapons systems adding to the relentless barrage. Despite the chaos, the Titan's shield and its sister ships remained steady, their towering forms radiating an air of unshakable strength. High Commander Vethric must be getting nervous, Elise said, a hint of dry humor in her tone. I don't think he expected our primitive ships to hold this long. Adrian allowed himself a faint smirk. Nervous or not, he won't back down. The Zorthans didn't come all this way to retreat. As if on cue, a new wave of enemy ships surged forward, this time including several mid-sized cruisers. These vessels, larger and better armed than the fighters, moved with the same predatory grace, their weapon systems lighting up as they targeted the Colossus fleet's flanks. Enemy cruisers entering the field, Oren reported. They're focusing on the Resolute and Ironclad. Adrian's smirk faded. The Resolute and Ironclad, while formidable in their own right, weren't as heavily armored as the Titan's shield. If the Zorthans managed to overwhelm their defenses, the entire fleet's formation could collapse. Order the Resolute to tighten its position, Adrian commanded. The Ironclad should reinforce its aft shields and prepare for evasive maneuvers. Elise relayed the orders with crisp efficiency, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. Moments later, the tactical display showed the two ships adjusting their positions, their movements precise despite the chaos around them. The Zorthan cruisers unleashed a withering barrage of plasma bolts, their emerald green energy streaking through space like vengeful comets. Some of the shots struck the Resolute, causing its shields to flare and ripple, but the ship held firm. The Ironclad returned fire with its rail cannons, the kinetic projectiles slamming into the enemy ships with devastating force. Direct hits on two enemy cruisers, Oren reported. Their shields are failing. Good, Adrian said. Have the Ironclad press the advantage. The Resolute should focus on clearing out enemy fighters. The bridge crew worked in near-perfect synchronization, their actions a testament to months of grueling training. Still, Adrian could sense the underlying tension in their movements, the unspoken fear that came with facing an enemy so advanced. The Zorthan flagship, the Spire, loomed in the distance, its dark, angular design radiating menace. Though it hadn't yet joined the fray, its presence was a constant reminder of the stakes. Adrian knew Vethric was watching, analyzing every move the humans made. Open a channel to the Spire, Adrian ordered. Elise hesitated but complied, her fingers dancing across the console. Moments later, the holographic form of High Commander Vethric appeared on the bridge once again. His expression was one of smug amusement, though a flicker of unease lingered in his eyes. Ah, Captain Holt, Vethric said, his voice dripping with condescension. I must admit, your ships are sturdier than I anticipated, but sturdiness is no substitute for strategy. Adrian met Vethric's gaze with steely resolve. You've underestimated humanity, High Commander. That was your first mistake. I suggest you retreat while you still can. Vethric chuckled, a low, grating sound. Retreat? Do you think these oversized relics of yours will turn the tide? Your fleet may be large, but it's slow, clumsy. Your ships are little more than targets waiting to be destroyed. We'll see about that, Adrian replied evenly. But when this battle is over, and your ships are nothing but debris, remember, it was humanity that sent you running. Vethric's smile faltered, but he recovered quickly. Bold words, Captain. Let's see if your actions can match them. The transmission cut off, leaving the bridge in tense silence. Elise turned to Adrian, her brow furrowed. That was bold, sir. Boldness is all part of the strategy, Adrian said. If we can rattle them even a little, it'll give us an edge. The battle raged on, the Colossus fleet's unrelenting firepower forcing the Zorthans to adjust their tactics. Despite their agility, the enemy ships struggled to breach the overlapping fields of defensive fire created by the massive human vessels. Still, the Zorthans were nothing if not persistent. Enemy reinforcements incoming, Oren announced. Looks like more cruisers and another wave of fighters. Adrian frowned. The Zorthans were committing more resources than he'd anticipated. Either they were more desperate than they let on, or they were testing the Colossus fleet for weaknesses before deploying their flagship. Elise, relay this to the fleet. Hold formation and focus fire on the cruisers. We need to thin their numbers before the Spire decides to join the fight. Yes, sir, Elise replied. The Titan's shield unleashed another volley, its heavy plasma cannons roaring to life. The recoil reverberated through the ship as bolts of searing energy lanced through space, striking one of the Zorthan cruisers dead center. The ship's shields buckled under the assault, and moments later it erupted in a fiery explosion. The crew erupted in subdued cheers, but Adrian raised a hand to silence them. "Save it for the end," he said. "We're not out of this yet." A sudden jolt shook the bridge, causing several crew members to stumble. Adrian gripped the railing tightly as alarms blared. "Report," he barked. "Shields hit by a concentrated strike," Zoran said, his voice strained. "We're down to 84%. Damage control teams to their stations," Adrian ordered. "Elise, adjust the shield rotation to compensate. We can't let them find a weak spot." The battle was far from over, but Adrian's confidence remained unshaken. The Zorthans were relentless, but so was humanity. The Titan's shield might be untested in real combat, but Adrian knew its potential. It wasn't just a ship, it was a symbol, a declaration that humanity would no longer be dismissed or ignored. As the Colossus fleet held its ground against the Zorthan onslaught, Adrian's resolve hardened. This was more than a battle. It was the beginning of a new chapter in humanity's history, and Adrian intended to write it in fire and steel. The battle outside raged on, but inside the Titan's shield, another war was brewing, one far less visible but equally dangerous. Captain Adrian Holt paced the bridge, his mind racing through tactical options as his crew scrambled to keep the massive starship operating under relentless pressure. Every moment felt like a lifetime, and the weight of command pressed heavily on his shoulders. "Captain, shields holding steady at 76%, Lieutenant Zoran reported from his station. "But we're seeing irregular fluctuations in the secondary grid." Adrian paused mid-stride and turned toward the console. "Irregular fluctuations? Elaborate." Zoran's brow furrowed as he sifted through the data. "It's odd. It doesn't look like damage from external fire. It's almost as if the systems are being tampered with." Adrian's jaw tightened. "Elise, get me Davin in engineering. Now." Commander Elise Tran nodded, her fingers flying across the console. Moments later, the gruff voice of Chief Engineer Davin Core filled the bridge's comms. "Core here. I don't have time for pleasantries, Captain. What do you need?" "Shields are fluctuating and it's not from external fire," Adrian said, his voice clipped. "I need answers, Davin. Could this be sabotage?" A moment of silence followed, broken only by the hum of the ship's systems and the distant thrum of weapons fire. Then Davin responded, his tone grim. "It's possible. We've been dealing with some odd anomalies down here, unusual power surges, redirected flows. I chalked it up to the stress on the system, but now I'm not so sure." "Investigate immediately," Adrian ordered, "and lock down critical systems. If someone is tampering with the Titan's shield, I want them found." "Understood," Davin replied. "But if it's sabotage, we're already in deep trouble." Adrian cut the comms and turned to Elise. "Send security teams to key locations. I want every corner of this ship monitored." "Yes, sir," Elise said, her tone as sharp as ever, though a flicker of unease passed across her face. The crew worked in tense silence as the battle outside continued to intensify. Adrian's mind churned. If there were saboteurs aboard, it meant the Zorthans had planned for this long before their fleet arrived. The thought only fueled his determination. He couldn't let them win. Not here, not now. "Captain, more irregularities detected," Zoran announced, "now affecting weapons targeting systems." Adrian clenched his fists. "Elise, coordinate with Davin. Prioritize weapons integrity." Before she could respond, the ship jolted violently, throwing several crew members off balance. Alarms blared, and the bridge lights flickered ominously. "Report," Adrian barked. "Massive energy spike in the aft section," Zoran shouted over the din. "Systems are overloading." Adrian's mind snapped into focus. "Evacuate the area and reroute power. Elise, Status on those security teams? They're en route, she replied, her voice strained as she coordinated the efforts. But if there's sabotage, they're already several steps ahead of us. Not for long, Adrian muttered, his expression hardening. In the engineering section, Chief Engineer Davin Core was in the middle of a firefight. The normally controlled chaos of the Titan's shield had devolved into outright anarchy as several Zorthan operatives revealed themselves, opening fire on the engineering crew. Davin, crouched behind a console, growled as plasma bolts ricocheted around him. "Security team, where the hell are you?" he shouted into his comm. 2 minutes out, came the reply. "Hold your position." "Hold my position, they say," Davin grumbled under his breath. "Like I'm going anywhere." He peeked around the console and fired his sidearm, forcing the saboteurs to duck behind cover. Sparks flew as stray shots struck exposed wiring, sending showers of light cascading across the room. "Davin," Adrian's voice crackled through the comm. "What's going on down there?" "We've got a full-blown Zorthan welcoming committee in engineering, Captain," Davin growled. "They're targeting the power core and shield generators." "Can you hold them off?" Davin snorted. "Do I have a choice?" "Security is on the way," Adrian assured him. "Buy us time, Davin. We need those systems operational." Yeah, Davin muttered, taking another shot at the saboteurs. No pressure or anything. Back on the bridge, Adrian monitored the situation with growing tension. The tactical display showed the Zorthan fleet pressing their assault, their cruisers attempting to flank the Colossus fleet, while their fighters harried the human vessels relentlessly. "Captain, shields down to 64%, Oren reported, "and we're losing power to the forward batteries." Adrian's mind raced. The Titan's shield was designed to endure punishment, but even its formidable systems had limits. He needed to end the sabotage before the ship's resilience gave out. "Elise, you have the bridge," Adrian said abruptly, stepping away from the command console. "I'm heading to engineering." "Captain, I strongly advise against," Elise began, but Adrian cut her off with a raised hand. "I'm not sitting here while they dismantle my ship," he said, his tone brooking no argument. "Coordinate the fleet and keep me updated." Elise nodded reluctantly. "Understood. Stay safe, sir." Adrian strode out of the bridge, his expression a mask of determination. The corridors of the Titan's shield were eerily quiet, the usual hum of activity replaced by the distant sounds of battle and the faint vibration of weapons fire. As he approached the engineering section, the sounds of combat grew louder. Rounding a corner, Adrian encountered the security team. "Report," he demanded. "Saboteurs have barricaded themselves near the main power core," the team leader replied. "We've neutralized a few, but they're dug in tight." "Then we flush them out," Adrian said, his voice cold. "No one takes this ship from us." The team moved swiftly, advancing down the corridor under covering fire. Adrian stayed close, his sidearm drawn, his every movement precise and deliberate. As they reached the barricade, a hail of plasma fire greeted them, forcing the team to take cover. "Grenades!" Adrian ordered. A pair of flash grenades arced over the barricade, exploding with blinding light and deafening noise. The saboteurs' fire faltered, and Adrian seized the moment, leading the charge. In the chaos that followed, the Zorthans were swiftly overpowered, their weapons clattering to the ground as the security team secured the area. "Davin," Adrian called, his voice echoing through the smoke-filled room. "Back here," came the gruff reply. Adrian found Davin crouched near the power core, his face streaked with soot and sweat. "They nearly fried the entire system," Davin said, gesturing to the damaged consoles. "But I've managed to stabilize it for now." "Good work," Adrian said, clapping a hand on Davin's shoulder. "Now let's make sure it stays that way." With the saboteurs neutralized and the system stabilized, Adrian returned to the bridge. The battle outside was still raging, but the Titan's shield was holding firm. As Adrian took his place at the command console, Elise turned to him, her expression a mix of relief and determination. "Saboteurs neutralized?" she asked. "Neutralized," Adrian confirmed. "And they won't get another chance." Elise nodded. "Good. Because the Zorthans are preparing their next move. Adrian's eyes narrowed as he studied the tactical display. The Zorthan fleet was regrouping, their cruisers forming a tight formation around their flagship. "Let them come," Adrian said, his voice steely. "The Titan's shield isn't going anywhere." The bridge of the Titan's shield was a hive of controlled chaos. The tactical display glowed faintly against the dim lighting, showing the Zorthan fleet regrouping for another wave of attacks. Captain Adrian Holt stood at the center of the activity, his sharp gaze fixed on the projected battlefield. Despite the tense atmosphere, his voice remained calm and unwavering. "They're regrouping," Commander Elise Tran said from her station. Her tone clipped. "Looks like they're tightening their formation, probably trying to protect their cruisers after the pounding we gave them." Adrian nodded, his mind racing. The Zorthans were fast learners, and their tactics had shifted. Their smaller fighters were no longer darting in and out on solo runs. Instead, they were swarming in coordinated waves, overwhelming the Colossus fleet's point defenses. Meanwhile, their cruisers had fallen back into a protective ring around the Dread Spire, ready to pounce on any perceived weakness. "They're testing us again," Adrian said. "This time they're betting on speed and precision. They're also forcing us to divide our fire," Lieutenant Zoran added from the sensor console. "If we focus too much on the fighters, their cruisers will pick us apart. If we go after the cruisers, the fighters will cripple our defenses." Adrian tapped a finger against the edge of the console, his mind already working through the problem. The Colossus fleet had been designed to withstand punishment, but the Zorthans weren't relying on brute force. They were exploiting their agility, probing for gaps in the overlapping fields of fire created by the massive human starships. "Recommendations?" Adrian asked, addressing the bridge crew. Elise glanced at him, her brow furrowed. "We need to adapt. The Colossus fleet was built to dominate through firepower, but right now, we're fighting at their speed. We need to force them to fight on our terms." Adrian nodded. "Agreed. But how?" Elise hesitated for a moment, then gestured to the display. "The size of our ships is a disadvantage in terms of speed, but it's an advantage in terms of coverage. If we tighten our formation and overlap our defensive grids, we can create a kill zone. Draw them in and let the fleet's combined firepower do the rest." Adrian considered her suggestion. It was risky. Tightening the formation would leave the fleet more vulnerable to concentrated fire, but it would also amplify their defensive capabilities. The Zorthans wouldn't expect humanity to adapt so quickly, and in warfare, unpredictability was often the greatest weapon. "Do it," Adrian said. "Relay the new formation to the fleet. I want the ironclad and resolute reinforcing our flanks. The Titan's shield will take the center." Elise nodded and began issuing orders, her voice steady and authoritative. Across the bridge, the crew moved with renewed purpose, adjusting their systems to accommodate the new strategy. As the Colossus fleet shifted into its new formation, the Zorthans responded almost immediately. Their fighters surged forward in dense waves, their movements precise and coordinated. The first few broke through the outer defensive grid, unleashing volleys of plasma bolts that splashed against the Titan's shield's armor. "Shields down to 60%, Zoran reported, his voice tense. "They're focusing their fire on the upper decks." Adrian gripped the edge of the console. "Hold the formation. Don't break ranks." The Titan's shield responded with a withering barrage of firepower, its turrets swiveling with mechanical precision to track the incoming fighters. Streams of tracer rounds and energy beams filled the void, cutting through the Zorthan swarms like a scythe. Explosions flared in quick succession, the debris scattering into space like glowing embers. "They're pressing harder," Elise said, her eyes fixed on the display, "but they're also getting sloppy." Adrian smirked faintly. "They didn't expect us to adapt this quickly. Keep the pressure on." The smaller human ships, though dwarfed by the massive Colossus fleet vessels, played a crucial role. The Resolute and Ironclad darted along the edges of the formation, their nimbleness allowing them to intercept enemy fighters that managed to slip through. Meanwhile, the Titan's shield, unleashed the full fury of its heavy plasma cannons, targeting the Zorthan cruisers lurking at the edge of the battlefield. Direct hit on enemy cruiser Kethral, Oren reported. Their shields are down to 20%. Finish them, Adrian said. The ironclad answered the call, its rail cannons roaring to life. The kinetic projectiles tore through the damaged cruiser's hull, ripping it apart in a spectacular explosion. The debris spiraled into the void, forcing nearby Zorthan ships to scatter. They're faltering, Elise observed. Their cruisers are falling back again. Adrian's expression hardened. That means they're setting up for something bigger. As if on cue, the dread Spire began to move. The Zorthan flagship, which had remained on the periphery of the battle, now surged forward. Its sleek, angular design was both beautiful and menacing, its hull bristling with advanced weaponry. Energy spikes lit up the tactical display, indicating that the ship's main cannon was charging. They're targeting us, Oren said, his voice taut. The Dread Spire's primary weapon is locking onto the Titan's shield. Adrian felt a chill run through him. The Dread Spire's main cannon was infamous, capable of punching through even the most advanced shields. If it hit, the Titan's shield would be crippled, or worse. Elise, focus all shield power to the forward grid, Adrian ordered. Oren, target the Dread Spire's weapon systems. I want every gun on this ship firing at that cannon. The bridge exploded into action as the crew carried out his orders. The Titan's shield unleashed a concentrated volley, its plasma cannons hammering the Dread Spire with relentless precision. The Zorthan flagship's shields shimmered under the assault, but they held firm. They're returning fire, Oren shouted. Elise glanced at him, her brow furrowed. We need to adapt. The Colossus fleet was built to dominate through firepower, but right now, we're fighting at their speed. We need to force them to fight on our terms. Adrian nodded. Agreed. But how? Elise hesitated for a moment, then gestured to the display. The size of our ships is a disadvantage in terms of speed, but it's an advantage in terms of coverage. If we tighten our formation and overlap our defensive grids, we can create a kill zone. Draw them in and let the fleet's combined firepower do the rest. Adrian considered her suggestion. It was risky. Tightening the formation would leave the fleet more vulnerable to concentrated fire, but it would also amplify their defensive capabilities. The Zorthans wouldn't expect humanity to adapt so quickly, and in warfare, unpredictability was often the greatest weapon. Do it, Adrian said. Relay the new formation to the fleet. I want the ironclad and resolute reinforcing our flanks. The Titan's shield will take the center. Elise nodded and began issuing orders, her voice steady and authoritative. Across the bridge, the crew moved with renewed purpose, adjusting their systems to accommodate the new strategy. As the Colossus fleet shifted into its new formation, the Zorthans responded almost immediately. Their fighters surged forward in dense waves, their movements precise and coordinated. The first few broke through the outer defensive grid, unleashing volleys of plasma bolts that splashed against the Titan's shield's armor. Shields down to 60%, Oren reported, his voice tense. They're focusing their fire on the upper decks. Adrian gripped the edge of the console. Hold the formation. Don't break ranks. The Titan's shield responded with a withering barrage of firepower, its turrets swiveling with mechanical precision to track the incoming fighters. Streams of tracer rounds and energy beams filled the void, cutting through the Zorthan swarms like a scythe. Explosions flared in quick succession, the debris scattering into space like glowing embers. They're pressing harder, Elise said, her eyes fixed on the display, but they're also getting sloppy. Adrian smirked faintly. They didn't expect us to adapt this quickly. Keep the pressure on. The smaller human ships, though dwarfed by the massive Colossus fleet vessels, played a crucial role. The Resolute and Ironclad darted along the edges of the formation, their nimbleness allowing them to intercept enemy fighters that managed to slip through. Meanwhile, the Titan's shield unleashed the full fury of its heavy plasma cannons, targeting the Zorthan cruisers lurking at the edge of the battlefield. Direct hit on enemy cruiser Kethral, Oren reported. Their shields are down to 20%. Finish them, Adrian said. The ironclad answered the call, its rail cannons roaring to life. The kinetic projectiles tore through the damaged cruiser's hull, ripping it apart in a spectacular explosion. The debris spiraled into the void, forcing nearby Zorthan ships to scatter. They're faltering, Elise observed. Their cruisers are falling back again. Adrian's expression hardened. That means they're setting up for something bigger. As if on cue, the dread Spire began to move. The Zorthan flagship, which had remained on the periphery of the battle, now surged forward. Its sleek, angular design was both beautiful and menacing, its hull bristling with advanced weaponry. Energy spikes lit up the tactical display, indicating that the ship's main cannon was charging. "They're targeting us," Zoran said, his voice taut. The dread Spire's primary weapon is locking onto the Titan's shield. Adrian felt a chill run through him. The dread Spire's main cannon was infamous, capable of punching through even the most advanced shields. If it hit, the Titan's shield would be crippled, or worse. "Elise, focus all shield power to the forward grid," Adrian ordered. "Zoran, target the dread Spire's weapon systems. I want every gun on this ship firing at that cannon." The bridge exploded into action as the crew carried out his orders. The Titan's shield unleashed a concentrated volley, its plasma cannons hammering the dread Spire with relentless precision. The Zorthan flagship's shields shimmered under the assault, but they held firm. "They're returning fire," Zoran shouted. A blinding beam of green energy erupted from the dread Spire, slicing through space with terrifying speed. The Titan's shield shook violently as the beam struck its forward shields, causing alarms to blare across the bridge. "Shields at 30%, Zoran yelled. "Structural integrity holding, but we can't take another hit like that." Adrian gritted his teeth. "We won't have to. Keep firing. Overload their systems." The Titan's shield continued its assault, its weapons pounding the dread Spire with unrelenting force. The smaller human ships joined in, their combined firepower creating a dazzling display of destruction. Slowly, the Zorthan flagship's shields began to falter. "They're weakening," Elise said, her voice filled with grim determination. "We're breaking through." Adrian's lips tightened into a thin line. "Push them back. Show them what humanity is capable of." As the dread Spire struggled to maintain its position, the Zorthan fleet began to waver. Their fighters, now outnumbered and outgunned, broke formation, leaving their cruisers exposed. The Colossus fleet seized the opportunity, unleashing a devastating counteroffensive that left the enemy reeling. "They're retreating," Zoran said, disbelief coloring his tone. "The dread Spire is pulling back." Adrian exhaled slowly, the tension in his chest easing slightly. The battle was far from over, but for the first time, humanity had forced the Zorthans onto the defensive. The Colossus fleet had held its ground, proving that even the mightiest galactic powers couldn't dismiss Earth so easily. "Signal the fleet," Adrian said, his voice steady. "Hold formation and prepare for the next wave. This isn't over yet." As the Zorthans regrouped on the edge of the battlefield, Adrian stood tall on the bridge, his resolve unshaken. The Titan's shield was battered but unbroken, and its crew had shown the galaxy what humanity could do when pushed to the brink. The Zorthans had underestimated them, and Adrian intended to make sure they never did so again. The dim lighting of the Titan's shield's bridge reflected the tension in the room. Alarms had subsided, but the faint hum of damaged systems and the low chatter of the crew kept the urgency alive. Captain Adrian Holt stood motionless in front of the tactical display, his eyes scanning the shifting positions of the Zorthan fleet. The dread Spire, though battered, loomed like a predator on the edge of the battlefield. Its surviving cruisers had formed a protective phalanx around it, their sharp, angular hulls bristling with weaponry. Meanwhile, the Zorthan fighters regrouped in scattered formations, their earlier precision disrupted by the Colossus fleet's overwhelming firepower. "They're reforming their lines," Commander Elise Tran said, breaking the silence. "If we give them enough time, they'll coordinate another assault." Adrian's jaw tightened. "We won't give them time." The Colossus fleet had held its ground so far, but victory was far from assured. The Titan's shield was still operational, but its shields were dangerously low, and the other ships in the fleet had sustained heavy damage. Morale among the crew was fragile, held together only by Adrian's unrelenting determination. "Status on the fleet?" Adrian asked, his voice cutting through the tension. Lieutenant Zoran leaned over his console, scanning the latest reports. "The Resolute and Ironclad are holding steady, but their ammunition reserves are running low. The hammer strike has taken critical damage to its engines. Engineering reports it'll need at least 30 minutes to be combat ready." "We don't have 30 minutes," Adrian muttered. He turned to Elise. "Can we consolidate our firepower?" Elise nodded. "If we focus the fleet's remaining resources, we can target one section of their formation and punch through. But it'll leave our other flanks exposed." Adrian's mind raced. The Zorthans had the advantage in numbers and speed, but their formation relied on maintaining cohesion. If humanity could break a hole in their lines, it could disrupt their entire strategy. "Prepare the fleet for a focused assault," Adrian said. "We'll target their left flank. I want all ships in position within 5 minutes." Elise relayed the orders, her voice firm and commanding. Across the bridge, the crew moved with renewed purpose. Despite the fatigue etched into their faces, they worked with precision, knowing the survival of humanity depended on their actions. "Captain," Zoran said, his tone hesitant, "there's another factor we need to consider." Adrian turned to him. "What is it?" "Our allies," Zoran replied. "The Calthoran observers have been monitoring the battle from the outskirts of the system. They've remained neutral so far, but if they see us falter, they might decide humanity isn't worth the risk." Adrian's expression hardened. The Calthorans, a technologically advanced species with considerable military resources, had been reluctant to align themselves with humanity. Their neutrality had frustrated Earth's leaders for years, but now their presence added another layer of complexity to the battle. "They're watching," Adrian said. "Good. Let them see what humanity is capable of." As the Colossus fleet adjusted its formation, the Zorthans responded with alarming speed. Their cruisers shifted to counter the concentrated assault, and their fighters swarmed toward the Titan's shield, intent on crippling the flagship before it could lead the charge. "Enemy fighters incoming," Zoran shouted. "They're focusing on the forward sections." "Point defenses online," Elise ordered. "Prepare countermeasures." The Titan's shield erupted in a storm of firepower, its turrets locking onto the incoming swarm. Explosions lit up the void as the fighters were torn apart, but their sheer numbers allowed several to slip through the defenses. Plasma bolts rained down on the ship's hull, causing the bridge to shudder violently. "Shields at 40%, Zoran reported. "We can't take much more of this." Adrian gripped the edge of the console. "Hold steady. Focus on the objective." The Resolute and Ironclad moved into position, their heavy guns targeting the Zorthan cruisers guarding the left flank. The hammer strike, though partially disabled, unleashed a barrage of missiles that streaked through space, forcing the enemy ships to scatter. "They're faltering," Elise said, a note of urgency in her voice. "We're breaking through." "Push harder," Adrian ordered. "We need to shatter their formation." The Titan's shield fired its main cannon, a searing beam of energy that cut through one of the Zorthan cruisers like a blade. The enemy ship erupted in a spectacular explosion, sending debris spiraling into the surrounding void. The remaining Zorthan ships scrambled to regroup, their cohesion finally breaking under the relentless assault. "Left flank is collapsing," Zoran shouted. "We've got an opening." Adrian didn't hesitate. "All ships advance, target the dread Spire." The Colossus fleet surged forward, its massive ships cutting through the Zorthan formation like battering rams. The Titan's shield led the charge, its hull scarred but unyielding. The Zorthans, now on the defensive, struggled to maintain their position as their flagship came under fire. "Captain, the dread Spire is charging its main cannon again," Elise warned. "If they fire, we're finished." Adrian's mind raced. The dread Spire was a formidable opponent, and its primary weapon was unmatched in destructive power. But the Zorthans hadn't anticipated the sheer audacity of humanity's strategy. "Prepare the ramming protocols," Adrian said, his voice calm despite the chaos. Elise's head snapped toward him, her eyes wide. You're serious? Deadly serious, Adrian replied. The Titan's shield is the only ship capable of withstanding a direct collision with the Dread Spire. If we take out their flagship, the rest of their fleet will crumble. The bridge fell silent as the crew absorbed his words. Then Elise straightened, her expression resolute. Understood. Ramming protocols online. Across the ship, alarms blared as the Titan's shield shifted course, aiming directly at the Dread Spire. The Zorthan flagship seemed to realize the danger too late. Its weapons fired desperately, but the human ship pressed forward, its reinforced hull absorbing the blows. Impact in 10 seconds, Zoran shouted. Adrian gripped the console, his voice ringing out across the bridge. Brace for impact. The collision was catastrophic. The Titan's shield slammed into the Dread Spire with the force of a meteor, its prow tearing through the enemy ship's hull. Explosions rippled along the Zorthan flagship as its systems overloaded, sending fire and debris spiraling into space. On the bridge, Adrian steadied himself as the ship groaned under the strain. Status, he demanded. The Dread Spire is disabled, Zoran replied, his voice filled with awe. Their fleet is retreating. Cheers erupted across the bridge, the crew's relief palpable. Adrian allowed himself a moment to exhale, but his focus remained sharp. The battle wasn't over, but humanity had delivered a decisive blow. Signal the fleet, Adrian said. Hold position and secure the area. The Zorthans know better than to underestimate us now. As the Colossus fleet regrouped, the remnants of the Zorthan forces fled, their formation shattered, and their morale broken. The Kalthoran observers, watching from the edges of the battlefield, began transmitting signals of their own. For the first time, humanity had proven itself not just as a survivor, but as a power capable of shaping the galaxy. Adrian stood tall on the bridge, his gaze fixed on the stars. The cost had been high, but the message was clear. Humanity was here to stay, and anyone who dared challenge them would face the unrelenting might of the Colossus fleet. The bridge of the Titan's shield was alive with tension as the aftermath of the ramming maneuver settled. Sparks flickered from damaged consoles, and the low hum of warning alarms persisted in the background. Captain Adrian Holt stood firm, his hands clasped behind his back, his gaze locked on the tactical display. The Zorthan fleet was in full retreat, but victory still felt fragile. They're pulling back, but this isn't over, Adrian said, breaking the silence. We've dealt them a serious blow, but the fleet's condition is critical. Commander Elise Tran glanced up from her station, her face pale but determined. Shields are down to 20%. Weapon systems on the Resolute and Ironclad are operational but barely. The hammer strike is still dead in the water. Adrian nodded, absorbing the information. We'll need every ship functional if they decide to regroup. How's the status on engineering? Elise hesitated for a moment. Chief Engineer Core reports partial stabilization, but the systems are strained, and he suspects we haven't dealt with all the saboteurs. The words hung heavy in the air. Adrian's jaw tightened. The first wave of sabotage had nearly crippled the Titan's shield during the battle, but they had been lucky to catch it in time. If Zorthan agents were still active on board, the next strike could be catastrophic. Get me Core, Adrian said, his tone sharp. Elise tapped her console, and moments later the gruff voice of Chief Engineer Davin Core came through the comms. Core here. I take it you've heard the bad news? Adrian's voice was steady, but his eyes were hard. Give me a full report. In short, we've patched the immediate damage, but something's not right, Core said, frustration evident in his tone. Power surges keep cropping up in non-critical systems. It's like someone's trying to reroute energy, but I can't pinpoint where. And before you ask, yes, we've scanned for anomalies. Whatever they're doing, they're good at it. Adrian's mind raced. The Titan's shield was a fortress, but its massive size made it vulnerable to infiltration. The Zorthans had gambled on sabotage to cripple humanity's flagship, and it was clear they hadn't given up. Do you think they're targeting the power core again? Adrian asked. It's possible, Core admitted. But if I were them, I'd go for something more subtle, Take out life support or navigation, force us to evacuate, then pick us off when we're defenseless. Adrian's jaw tightened. The thought of abandoning the ship was unthinkable, but he couldn't ignore the possibility. Double security around critical systems, he ordered, and Core, find them, whatever it takes. Understood, Core replied, but you better be ready for a fight. If they've stayed hidden this long, they won't go down easy. Adrian cut the comm and turned to Elise. I want security teams sweeping every deck. Focus on engineering and command. If anyone so much as sneezes in the wrong direction, I want to know about it. Elise nodded, her expression grim. I'll take care of it. As the orders went out, the Titan's shield settled into an uneasy rhythm. The crew worked tirelessly to repair the damage and maintain defenses, but the threat of sabotage hung over them like a shadow. Adrian could feel the weight of it pressing down, the knowledge that their greatest enemy might not be outside the ship but within it. An hour later, the tension finally broke. Captain! Oren's voice rang out from the sensor station, sharp and urgent. I'm detecting unauthorized activity in the lower decks. Someone's accessing the auxiliary power grid. Adrian's pulse quickened. Security teams, converge on the auxiliary power grid. Lock it down. Elise relayed the orders as Adrian moved to the comms. Core, do you have eyes on this? I'm on it, Core replied. Rerouting visual feeds now. Got it. There's movement near Junction 17C. Looks like 2, maybe 3 hostiles. Saboteurs? Adrian asked. Who else? Core muttered. They're messing with the power lines. If they succeed, they'll knock out our backup systems. Adrian didn't hesitate. I'm heading down there. Captain, that's not advisable, Elise began, but Adrian silenced her with a look. I'm not sitting here while they tear this ship apart, he said. You have the bridge. Elise clenched her jaw but nodded. Stay safe, sir. Adrian grabbed his sidearm and headed for the lift, his footsteps echoing through the corridor. The Titan's shield felt strangely quiet, the usual hum of activity replaced by an oppressive stillness. As the lift descended, Adrian's thoughts raced. He had faced countless battles in his career, but this felt different. This wasn't a clash of ships or fleets. It was a fight for the soul of humanity's greatest creation. When the lift doors opened, Adrian stepped into a dimly lit corridor. The air was thick with tension, and the distant sounds of footsteps echoed through the metal walls. He raised his weapon, moving cautiously toward Junction 17C. Captain, this is Core. The engineer's voice crackled through his comm. I've got eyes on them, 3 hostiles. They're armed, but they're focused on the power grid. You'll have the element of surprise. Understood, Adrian replied. What are they doing? Planting charges, Core said grimly. If those go off, we'll lose life support in half the ship. Adrian's grip tightened on his weapon. Not on my watch. He rounded the corner and spotted the saboteurs. They were Zorthan operatives, their sleek armor glinting in the faint light. 2 were busy rigging explosives to the power conduits, while the 3rd stood guard, his weapon scanning the corridor. Adrian moved swiftly, aiming for the guard first. His shot was precise, the plasma bolt striking the Zorthan square in the chest. The alien crumpled to the ground with a guttural hiss. The other 2 saboteurs whirled around, their eyes widening in surprise. Adrian didn't give them time to react. He fired again, hitting one in the shoulder and forcing the other to dive for cover. Security, I need backup at Junction 17C, Adrian shouted into his comm. On our way, came the reply. The remaining saboteur returned fire, plasma bolts scorching the walls as Adrian ducked behind a support beam. He returned fire, his shots forcing the Zorthan back. The alien snarled, drawing a blade and charging at him. Adrian sidestepped the attack, delivering a swift strike to the Zorthan's arm. The blade clattered to the ground and Adrian fired a final shot, ending the fight. Seconds later, the security team arrived, their weapons raised. Area secure, Captain, the team leader said. Adrian nodded, lowering his weapon. Disable those charges and sweep the area. Make sure there aren't any more surprises. As the team worked to disarm the explosives, Adrian leaned against the wall, his adrenaline beginning to subside. The battle wasn't over, but they had won this skirmish. Core, Adrian said into his comm. The saboteurs are neutralized. Status on the power grid? Stable for now, Core replied, but I'll feel better once we've triple-checked everything. Adrian managed a faint smile. You and me both. Returning to the bridge, Adrian was greeted by Elise's relieved expression. I assume it's handled? She asked. For now, Adrian said. He turned to the tactical display, his resolve hardening. The Zorthans sent their best, and we're still standing. Now it's time to remind them who they're dealing with. The bridge of the Titan's shield was an orchestra of controlled chaos. The tactical display dominated the room, showing the disorganized remnants of the Zorthan fleet scattered across the battlefield. Yet the Spire, the enemy flagship, remained defiant, a dark monolith looming in the void. It wasn't retreating, it was preparing for one final assault. Captain, Commander Elise Tran said, her voice edged with urgency. The Spire's energy readings are spiking. They're charging their main cannon again. Adrian Holt's face was a mask of resolve. Though his mind raced through scenarios, the Titan's shield and the rest of the Colossus fleet were battered. Shields were at their limits, ammunition reserves were dwindling, and the crew was exhausted. Yet surrender was not an option. Not while the enemy remained a threat. Do we have an estimate on how long until they fire? Adrian asked. Lieutenant Oren scanned his console, his expression grim. 3 minutes, sir. If they fire, our shields won't hold. Elise turned to Adrian, her brow furrowed. We have to take them out before then, but with our weapons at reduced capacity, we won't punch through their shields in time. Adrian's eyes narrowed as a plan began to form. It was reckless, dangerous, and could cost them everything. But it was also their best shot. Elise, he said, his tone calm but firm, prepare the Titan's shield for a ramming maneuver. The bridge went silent. Even the faint hum of the consoles seemed to dim as the weight of Adrian's words sank in. Elise's eyes widened. Ramming, sir? You can't be serious. I am, Adrian replied. The Titan's shield was built to take punishment. We use its size and mass to our advantage. If we ram the Spire, their shields won't matter. Elise hesitated, then took a breath, her expression hardening. Understood. Initiating ramming protocols. Oren's voice wavered. Captain, if we miss... We won't miss, Adrian interrupted. Elise, signal the fleet. Have the Resolute and Ironclad cover our flanks. Everyone else is to hold their positions and provide suppressive fire. This is our fight to finish. Elise nodded and relayed the orders, her voice steady despite the tension crackling through the air. Across the battlefield, the Colossus fleet adjusted its formation. The smaller human ships shifted into defensive positions, their weapons targeting the remaining Zorthan cruisers, while the Titan's shield began its deliberate advance toward the Spire. Engines at full power, Elise reported. Course locked on the Spire. Adrian's gaze remained fixed on the display. The Titan's shield moved like a behemoth, its massive hull cutting through the void with a grim finality. The Zorthans, realizing what was happening, responded with a furious counterattack. Enemy fighters inbound, Oren shouted. They're trying to intercept us. Point defenses online, Adrian ordered. Focus all fire on clearing the path. The Titan's shield came alive, its turrets swiveling to target the incoming swarm. Streams of tracer rounds and energy beams filled the void, tearing through the enemy fighters. Explosions flared like miniature stars. But still, the Zorthans pressed on, their desperation driving them to reckless bravery. Shields down to 15%, Oren reported as the ship absorbed another volley of plasma fire. Keep pushing, Adrian said, his voice unyielding. We're almost there. The Spire loomed larger with every passing second. Its sleek, angular design radiated menace, and the energy readings from its main cannon reached critical levels. The Zorthans weren't retreating. They were preparing to fire even if it meant mutual destruction. They're not backing down, Elise said. If they fire now, they won't get the chance, Adrian interrupted. He stepped closer to the console, his hands gripping the edge. Prepare for impact. The Titan's shield roared forward, its engines pushing it to maximum speed. The Zorthans launched a final desperate assault, their remaining cruisers unleashing everything they had. Plasma bolts rained down on the human flagship, causing the bridge to shudder violently. "Structural integrity at critical levels," Oren shouted. "We can't take much more of this." "We won't have to," Adrian said, his eyes locked on the display. "All hands, brace for impact." The collision was cataclysmic. The Titan's shield slammed into the dread spire with the force of a meteor, its reinforced prow piercing through the Zorthan flagship's shields and tearing into its hull. The impact sent shockwaves rippling through both ships, and the void was filled with the blinding light of cascading explosions. On the bridge of the Titan's shield, Adrian was thrown forward, barely catching himself against the console. The ship groaned under the strain, and alarms blared as systems overloaded. "Status!" Adrian barked. Elise, her face pale but determined, checked her console. "Hull integrity holding. The dread spire it's breaking apart." Adrian turned to the display. The dread spire was in ruins, its once imposing form now a shattered wreck. Secondary explosions rippled through its structure, and what remained of the Zorthan fleet was in full retreat, their formation collapsing in disarray. "They're running," Oren said, his voice filled with awe. "We did it." A cheer erupted across the bridge, the tension breaking like a dam. Adrian allowed himself a brief moment to exhale, but his mind was already racing ahead. "Signal the fleet," he said, his voice cutting through the noise. "Cease pursuit and regroup. Priority is to secure the battlefield and recover our wounded." Elise nodded and relayed the orders. Across the comms, the voices of other captains echoed, their relief and admiration evident. The Colossus fleet had endured, and humanity had prevailed against impossible odds. As the Titan's shield settled into position, Adrian took a moment to survey the battlefield. The debris of the Zorthan fleet drifted aimlessly, a testament to the power and resilience of humanity's mightiest ships. Yet the cost of victory was undeniable. "Damage report," Adrian said, his tone softer now. Elise scanned the latest data. "Significant structural damage to the Titan's shield, but we're still operational. The Resolute and Ironclad sustained heavy hits but are holding steady. The Hammerstrike is requesting emergency repairs." Adrian nodded. "We'll see to it. Make sure all captains are informed. We're not leaving anyone behind." Oren looked up from his console. "Captain, incoming transmission from the Calthorans. They're congratulating us." Adrian raised an eyebrow. The Calthorans, who had observed the battle in silence, had refused to commit to humanity's cause. Now their tone was different. "Patch them through," Adrian said. A hologram flickered to life, revealing the imposing figure of High Counselor Serath, a Calthoran diplomat. Her expression was a mix of admiration and caution. "Captain Holt," Serath said, her voice resonant. "Humanity has proven its strength today. The Calthoran Assembly will reevaluate our position. You have earned our respect." Adrian inclined his head. "Respect is a good start. Let's see where it takes us." The transmission ended, and Adrian turned back to his crew. The battle was over, but the war for humanity's place in the galaxy had only begun. As the Titan's shield drifted among the stars, battered but unbroken, Adrian allowed himself a moment of quiet triumph. They had faced the Zorthan Dominion and emerged victorious, proving once and for all that humanity was not to be underestimated. And though the journey ahead would be fraught with challenges, Adrian knew one thing for certain. Humanity had found its place among the stars, and they weren't going anywhere. The remnants of the Zorthan fleet retreated, their formation shattered, and their once dominant presence reduced to a chaotic scatter across the stars. The battlefield, littered with debris and glowing wreckage, bore witness to the titanic clash that had just unfolded. Yet, amidst the devastation, humanity's Colossus fleet stood victorious. The massive ships, though scarred and battered, remained imposing monuments of survival and defiance. On the bridge of the Titan's shield, Captain Adrian Holt surveyed the scene with a mix of relief and exhaustion. His hands gripped the edge of the command console, his knuckles pale against the strain of the past hours. Around him, the crew worked tirelessly to restore order, their movements reflecting the collective weight of what they had just achieved. "Damage report," Adrian said, his voice steady despite the lingering adrenaline. Commander Elise Tran glanced up from her console, her usually sharp demeanor softened by exhaustion. Shields are completely depleted. Hull integrity is at 60%, with breaches in 3 sections. Engineering teams are sealing them now. Weapon systems are operating at 25% capacity. Life support is stable, but auxiliary power is still fluctuating. Adrian nodded. And the rest of the fleet? The Resolute is reporting moderate damage but remains combat capable, Elise replied. The ironclad sustained heavy damage to its forward section and is running on emergency power. The Hammerstrike is immobilized but stable. Repairs are underway. Survivors? Adrian asked, his tone grave. Elise hesitated. Casualty reports are still coming in, but initial estimates suggest heavy losses across all ships. We've already initiated rescue operations for ejected crew. Adrian's jaw tightened, the weight of command pressing down harder than ever. Every life lost was a reminder of the cost of war, but the alternative, submission to the Zorthan Dominion, would have been far worse. Continue rescue operations, he said. Coordinate with the fleet to recover as many as we can, and prioritize repairs on the Hammerstrike. We can't afford to leave any ship vulnerable. Yes, sir, Elise said, her voice resolute despite the weariness in her eyes. The bridge settled into a tense quiet as the crew worked to stabilize the Titan's shield. Adrian allowed himself a brief moment to exhale, but his thoughts remained sharp. The battle was won, but the repercussions would ripple across the galaxy. Humanity had shown its strength, but strength alone wasn't enough to secure their place among the stars. Captain, Lieutenant Zoran said, breaking the silence. Incoming transmission from the Calthoran observation vessel. Adrian's brow furrowed. The Calthorans, humanity's enigmatic allies, had observed the battle from a safe distance, refusing to intervene despite the stakes. Their stance had always been one of cautious neutrality, valuing self-preservation over risk. Now it seemed they had something to say. Put it through, Adrian ordered. The holographic projector activated, and the figure of High Counselor Serath appeared. Her tall, regal frame was draped in flowing robes of deep indigo, and her glowing, pupilless eyes radiated both intelligence and caution. Behind her, the faint outline of the Calthoran vessel shimmered, its sleek design a testament to their advanced technology. Captain Holt, Serath began, her voice resonant and deliberate. On behalf of the Calthoran Assembly, I extend my congratulations. Humanity has achieved what many thought impossible. Adrian met her gaze, his own expression measured. Thank you, Counselor. I hope this proves what we've been saying all along. Humanity is not a minor species to be dismissed or ignored. Serath inclined her head slightly. You have proven your strength, Captain. Your Colossus fleet is an impressive achievement, and your defiance against the Zorthan Dominion will not go unnoticed. The Assembly will convene to discuss the implications of today's events. Adrian's eyes narrowed slightly. Implications? We've just demonstrated that humanity is capable of standing against one of the galaxy's most powerful empires. What more do you need to see? Serath's expression remained impassive. Strength alone does not guarantee alliance, Captain, but you have earned our respect. That is no small feat. The transmission ended abruptly, leaving the bridge in a heavy silence. Adrian exhaled slowly, his fists unclenching as he processed the exchange. The Calthorans were not known for their warmth, but their acknowledgement of humanity's strength was a step forward, however small. What do you think? Elise asked, her tone cautious. Adrian turned to her, his expression thoughtful. I think the Calthorans are watching closely. They're testing us just like the Zorthans did. We've given them something to think about. Elise nodded. And the rest of the galaxy? Adrian's lips curved into a faint smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. The galaxy now knows what humanity is capable of, and they'll be watching too. The bridge settled back into its rhythm as Adrian returned to the tactical display. The Zorthan fleet was gone, but the battlefield remained a graveyard of shattered ships and floating debris. Rescue operations continued, and the remaining human ships moved to secure the area. "Sir," Zoran said, his voice tentative, "we're picking up transmissions from other sectors. Allied colonies are celebrating the victory. They're calling it a miracle." Adrian's expression softened. "It's not a miracle, Lieutenant. It's the result of sacrifice, determination, and ingenuity. Make sure the colonies know that." "Yes, sir," Zoran replied. Hours passed as the Colossus fleet regrouped, its battered ships forming a defensive perimeter around the battlefield. The mood aboard the Titan's shield remained somber, the weight of the battle still heavy on everyone's minds. Yet amidst the exhaustion and grief, there was a spark of pride, a recognition that humanity had achieved something extraordinary. Adrian stood on the observation deck, his hands resting on the railing as he gazed out at the stars. The faint glow of Earth was visible in the distance, a fragile blue sphere against the vastness of space. It was for that world, and the countless lives it held, that they had fought. The door behind him slid open, and Elise entered, her footsteps soft against the metal floor. She stopped a few feet away, her presence grounding. "Repairs are progressing," she said. "The hammer strike should be operational within the next 12 hours, and the fleet is holding steady." Adrian nodded, his gaze remaining on the stars. "Good. We'll need to be ready for whatever comes next." Elise hesitated for a moment, then spoke. "You made the right call, Captain. Ramming the dread Spire. It was risky, but it worked. You saved us." Adrian turned to her, his expression contemplative. "We survived, Elise. But saving us? That's a different story." Elise studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Still, the crew believes in you, and so do I." Adrian offered a faint smile. "Thank you, but this isn't about me, it's about humanity. Today we proved we belong out here. Now we need to make sure the galaxy doesn't forget it." As the Titan's shield continued its quiet vigil, Adrian allowed himself a moment of reflection. The battle had tested them in ways they had never imagined, but they had emerged stronger. And though the road ahead would be fraught with challenges, one thing was certain. Humanity was no longer a minor player in the galaxy. They were a force to be reckoned with, and their future was only beginning. The Titan's shield drifted silently in the vast expanse of space, its massive silhouette framed by the distant glow of Earth and the debris field left behind by the shattered Zorthan fleet. The quiet was deceptive, a stark contrast to the chaos that had raged mere hours ago. On the bridge, Captain Adrian Holt stood tall, his presence commanding even in the aftermath of the battle. The crew moved with purpose, repairing damaged systems and cataloging the fleet's condition. Their movements were steady, though exhaustion weighed heavily on them. Adrian could see it in their faces, the weariness, the grief for lost comrades, but also the pride. They had done the impossible, and they knew it. "Captain," Commander Elise Tran said from her station, breaking the silence, "fleet-wide damage assessments are complete. Casualties are high, but the majority of our ships remain operational." Adrian nodded, his jaw tightening. "And the rescue efforts?" Lieutenant Zoran, seated at the tactical console, answered. 78% of escape pods have been recovered. The remaining pods are scattered in the debris field. We're prioritizing those areas now." "Good," Adrian said. "No one gets left behind." Elise hesitated before speaking again. "The crew is asking if you'll address them, sir." Adrian looked at her, his eyes narrowing slightly. It wasn't a request he had expected, but it made sense. The battle had tested the Colossus fleet in ways no training could have prepared them for, and while they had emerged victorious, the cost was high. They needed more than orders. They needed direction, purpose, and a reminder of what they had fought for. "Patch me through," Adrian said. Elise nodded, tapping a series of commands into her console. The faint chime of the fleet-wide communication channel activating echoed across the bridge. Adrian took a breath and stepped forward, his voice steady but filled with conviction. "This is Captain Holt," he began. To all crew members across the Colossus fleet, I want you to know one thing. We did it. We stood against one of the most powerful empires in the galaxy, and we won. Not because we had superior numbers or technology, but because we refused to back down. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in before continuing. We've proven something today, not just to the Zorthans, but to the entire galaxy. Humanity is not a species to be dismissed or underestimated. We've earned our place among the stars, and no one can take that from us. Adrian's voice softened, carrying a note of sorrow. But this victory came at a cost. We've lost comrades, friends, family, people who gave everything to protect what we hold dear. Their sacrifice will not be forgotten. We owe it to them to keep fighting, to ensure that what we've built, what we've achieved, endures. He straightened, his tone hardening again. To the Zorthan Dominion and any others watching, this is your only warning. Humanity will not bow. If you challenge us again, you'll find that the shadow of our fleet doesn't just darken your skies, it burns your worlds. The communication channel fell silent as Adrian stepped back, his expression unreadable. Across the bridge, the crew exchanged glances, a renewed sense of purpose in their eyes. Powerful speech, Elise said quietly, a faint smile tugging at her lips. It wasn't just for them, Adrian admitted. It was for all of us. The bridge settled into a steady rhythm once more as the fleet continued its operations. Adrian turned his attention to the tactical display, which showed the scattered debris of the Zorthan fleet and the faint signals of distant Allied ships moving to reinforce their position. "Sir," Oren said, his voice cutting through the quiet. "Incoming transmission from Earth. It's from the United Galactic Council." Adrian's brow furrowed. The Council had been hesitant to fully support humanity's efforts, their trust in the Colossus fleet's untested capabilities tenuous at best. This transmission could be pivotal. "Put it through," Adrian ordered. The holographic projector activated, revealing the figure of Counselor Thalora, a representative of Earth's allied species. Her silver-gray skin shimmered under the holographic light, and her bright, crystalline eyes were fixed on Adrian with a mixture of respect and caution. "Captain Holt," Thalora began, her voice smooth and measured. "The United Galactic Council has been monitoring the events of this battle closely. Your victory against the Zorthan Dominion is remarkable.